Okay, let's see here. Am I on this live? Let me just double check. Trying out some new technology today for the live stream, so I just want to make sure that it's actually working. So give me 1 second here. Hold on. Hello. Okay. This is kind of exciting for me because I've been doing these weekly live streams, but just only in my Facebook group. And this week I am testing having a live stream on Facebook and on YouTube and on LinkedIn at the same time so that more of you guys can actually access this. So I think I see myself live. If you guys can hear me, do me a favor and just drop a comment down below, whether you are on YouTube or on Facebook or on LinkedIn. Doesn't matter. If you drop a comment so that I know you're seeing this and hearing this. I'm using a new software this week that allows me to basically stream to multiple places at once. And so I just want to make sure that it actually works. Let's see here. Steven says loud and clear. Okay, cool. Awesome, guys. Well, it looks like I'm on, so I will go ahead and get started. Hopefully you guys are all doing well on this Tuesday. My name is Sam Shaw. I'm the founder of Wall Street Mastermind. For those of you who don't know me, you're new to my Facebook group, or you just start following me on LinkedIn, or whatever it may be, welcome to the group. And every single week on Tuesdays at this time, I do a live training here inside the group, or usually here inside the group. But like I said, today I am trying this new thing where I do it in multiple places at once. So hopefully this technology is awesome and everything works well. Now today, what we're going to be talking about is how you can accelerate your technical interview preparation process. Okay, because for a lot of you, that's probably your number one concern right now, right? Is you want to make sure that you get up to speed on your technicals as quickly as possible. And it's important because especially, I mean, depending on what year you are, but especially if you're, say, a sophomore right now and the summer internship recruiting process for 2022 has already started, right? It's most applications started opening up as of mid-January. So it's been almost 2 months. And at this point, we've seen about 20 plus applications that have already opened, right? And so some interviews have even started happening already. Like, you know, for those of you that saw my email from earlier today, I have a client who has a final round interview this Friday on the 12th with Houlihan Lokey, right? And so some firms are moving very, very quickly. And so if you've either been studying for your technical interviews, but you've spent a lot of time on it and you still don't feel like you're making a lot of progress, or if you actually, even worse, haven't started yet, but you know you need to start, or you're feeling like you're behind the 8 ball and you're just trying to catch up, then we're going to talk about why it hasn't been working well for you so far and what is the better way to do it. Okay, so before I dive in terms of, you know, why you should even be listening to me, or, you know, am I someone who's just a random dude on the internet, or do I actually know what I'm talking about? Previously, I worked at Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank in investment banking for a few years. I also then worked in private equity for a couple of years at GI Partners. And then after that, I worked for a couple of different pretty successful tech startups that you guys have most likely heard of, including Square, back when they were a very small company, just worth $3 billion. Today, they're worth, I don't know, 20, 30x that, I think, as well as GitHub, back when they were still a Series B startup, joined when they were around a $750 million valuation. and eventually they got acquired by Microsoft for $7.5 billion, right? And so that's kind of like my professional experience prior to Wall Street Mastermind. And then a few years ago, I started Wall Street Mastermind, and in the last 3 years or so, we've worked with over 300 students, probably close to 350 now, help them basically recruit for investment banking. And of the clients that have gone through the entire recruiting process and are now done, which is about half of our clients, over 90% of them have successfully gotten into investment banking. Okay. I think at one point we were up to maybe like 94% or something success rate. And then obviously COVID happened. And so things got a little bit harder this past year. Our success rate dropped a little bit, but not too much, down to 91%, which is still something that we're very, very proud of, right? Given everything that happened. And so the bottom line is this, like I've worked with probably more students than anyone else that you're ever going to meet out there, like personally worked with them, right? Not just worked with them, but like I personally coach these people. And so, we've been able to figure out the things that work and the things that don't work when it comes to the investment banking recruiting process. And to be honest, it's pretty formulaic. Like it can be, I know it seems like a black box from the outside looking in. It can feel like, you have no idea what you're supposed to be doing or whether something's going to work or not. But actually, like once you figure it out, it's pretty straightforward. And it's the easy and repeatable process, which is why, it has to be a repeatable process, or otherwise we wouldn't be able to have the type of success rate that we have so consistently, right? So today we're just going to talk about one piece of that process, or one piece of that formula, which is the technical piece, right? There are other pieces that obviously we don't have time to cover everything within just 1 hour, right? But your applications are very important as well. Your networking is very important as well. Technical is what we're talking about today. And then your behavioral interviews are very, very important as well. And really, like, I think of these things as different pieces of the puzzle, right? When you're trying to put together a puzzle and under time pressure, no less, right? It's like not just, hey, put together this piece of puzzle, but you have this much time to do it. And the time limit is basically, kind of the recruiting window that you have to get these internship offers, right? Once the deadline's passed or once the offers are given out, it's done, right? So if you're trying to put together a puzzle, you need all 4 pieces of the puzzle to complete the picture, right? If you only have 3 out of the 4 or 2 out of the 4, whatever that missing piece is going to prevent you from either getting selected for the interviews or passing the interviews. Okay, so today we'll talk about one piece of the puzzle, which is a technical piece. And so the concept that I want to explain to you guys is there's like the old way and the new way. Okay, and this is something that doesn't just apply to investment banking, but it applies to pretty much everything in life, right? So I'll give you an analogy. Now, I'm going to get into the old way and the new way for the technical interview in a second. But like if we talk about phones, cell phones, mobile phones, right? Like everyone has one, right? If you think back to like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people were still using dumb phones, right? Like people were using Nokias or Razors. I mean, most of you are probably too young to even remember what that's like. Okay, you guys live in the smartphone generation where probably all you've ever known is either an iPhone or an Android phone, right? But even if we talk about an iPhone, when the iPhone first came out, there was, the generation 1 iPhone, then Gen 2, then iPhone 3, then now we're up to like iPhone 10 or iPhone 12. I don't even know what version we're on anymore. But every year there's a new iPhone that comes out that has slightly better specs, right? Better camera, better, more memory, right? You can put more pictures on your phone, like whatever it may be. And the reason why that's happening is because the industry is becoming more and more competitive, right? Like Apple can't just, keep selling the same generation of iPhones with no improvement when Google and Samsung and all these other phone manufacturers are coming out with better specs, right? As is the case with most things in life, things only get more competitive over time, right? Think about those of you that try to get into the top colleges today. It's a lot harder to get into a top college today than it was back when I was in college, right? Because everybody knows so much more now, right? There's so much more information out there. There's actually, I mean, back in my days, you probably just do the best you can to find as much information as you can. Maybe talk to some family members or friends who have applied to college before you and see what tips they have. Nowadays, with the internet, with all the information that's out there, there's more and more people that know exactly what they need to do. And then so the competition is becoming tougher, right? And then so now what you can do is actually you can hire people who used to be admission counselors at these colleges to help you apply for college and tell you what to write your essays and this and that, right? Now, what does this have to do with investment banking and recruiting, though? What does this have to do with your technical interview prep? Well, back when I was in college, so I graduated in 2008, so it was a long time ago, peak of the financial crisis, horrible time to recruit for banking because there weren't a lot of jobs. But even back then, a lot of the resources that you guys kind of take for granted now, like your interview guides, right? Wall Street Oasis interview guides, Breaking the Wall Street interview guides, 400 questions guide, Rosenbaum and Pearl, like whatever it is that you guys use, like, financial modeling courses. These resources weren't widely available, or at least weren't super well known yet back then. Like these companies, if you look at how old some of these companies are, they're about 10 to 12 years old, right? And so they were brand new companies back then, and they came out with these interview guides and these financial modeling courses that most people didn't know about and weren't using yet. So then back in my days, those of us who actually use these interview guides were way ahead of the curve, right? We were like kind of the first movers, so to speak. So there's a first mover advantage, right? And so as long as we read these guides and we memorized the answers in these guides, we were already way more knowledgeable than our competition, right? And fast forward to today in 2021, how have things changed? Well, if you think about it, today, if you read one of these guides, you're no longer ahead of the curve, right? Because today, like anyone who's serious about getting into investment banking, they know about these interview guides, right? Back then, the popular guide, believe it or not, was actually the Vault guide. Okay, I don't know if anyone still reads the Vault guide, but if you read the Vault guide, I'm gonna give you a piece of advice right now. Stop reading the Vault guide, because the Vault guide is a really crappy guide. It's like super basic, overly simplistic, will absolutely not get you a level of understanding to the level that it needs to be for you to be competitive. Okay, but even if you read one of the better guides out there, like there are 2 or 3 guides, like the ones that I already listed, that are kind of like just the de facto industry-wide standard now, right? Like everybody has them. Any of your friends that are recruiting, they'll have them. Your upperclassmen, like if they try to help you, the first thing that they'll do is they'll pass down the guides that they use and say, here you go, like just use these guides, right? And so that's kind of like the equivalent of the people who, we all know, like my parents or, people in the generation above us who they buy a phone and it's like 5 years old, 10 years old, and they just keep using that and they don't want to switch. They don't want to use a new phone because they're not familiar with it. They don't know how to use it. They don't know how to use all these cool features and new apps and whatever, right? Even though the new phone is so much better, right? So nowadays you got to understand, if all you're doing is memorizing these guides, first of all, it's very, very time consuming, right? I don't know how long it'll take you guys to memorize answers to 400 questions, but it's a lot, right? The second thing is, the reason why it's taking you so long is because most of you, what you're doing is you're memorizing these answers without really understanding the underlying concepts, right? Which is why it's taking a lot longer, because brute force memorization is really inefficient. And it's something that you have to do over and over and over again, where if you memorize this answer this week, but you don't touch it for an entire week and you come back a week later, you're probably not going to remember that answer very well, right? So then you have to go back and you have to keep memorizing that same answer over and over and over again because you're afraid that you're going to forget it. It's a big waste of time, right? So then if you fast forward to today, like what you have to ask yourself is, okay, well, what is the equivalent of the iPhone 10 or iPhone 12 or whatever the latest model is today, right? What is something that you can do where you're the first mover, where you're doing something that not many other people are doing yet, right? Your competition's not doing this. And not only that, it's faster, right? It's got faster processing speed, right? And it's more efficient and it gets you a better result, right? And so the way that a very small group of students have been doing this now is, look, you can actually now, by the way, this never existed back in my days. Like this was not available. So this is part of the evolution, right? As the industry has become more and more competitive, okay, now it's no longer just enough to have read these guys because everyone has read them. Well, what else is there? What else can we do, right? So nowadays, what a small group of students are doing is, instead of trying to read these guides and memorize all the answers, spending hundreds of hours, sometimes upwards of hundreds of hours to learn it, you can actually learn everything. We tested this many, many times. You can actually learn everything you need in just 20 to 30 hours. Now, 20 to 30 hours, it's not a lot. I don't know what you think, but it's not a lot, right? Even if you only dedicated, let's say, 2 hours a day, which I don't think is too much to ask if you're really serious about this job. But if you dedicate 2 hours a day, you could be done with this in less than 2 weeks, right? And so how are they doing this in just 20 to 30 hours though? Well, for one, the first thing is, instead of trying to teach you everything, trying to teach yourself something that you don't really understand yet, like trying to self-study and learn something that you're not a subject matter expert in, find a subject matter expert, find someone who's actually really, really strong with their technical knowledge, and have them actually teach it to you, right? It's the same thing as like why you decide to go to school, why you go to class and learn from an actual professor who's a PhD in whatever class it is that you're taking, as opposed to you buying a textbook and staying in your dorms and just trying to, read that book a day in and day out and trying to learn a subject matter that way. Because one, it's not effective, right? And two, since you're not a subject matter expert yet, there are going to be things that you're going to miss, right? So that's the first thing, right? So a lot of what our clients are doing is like, they're not just trying to learn the stuff on their own, right? They're having bankers actually teach them all the technical knowledge they need, right? And then when you do it that way, the reason why it's a lot faster is because you don't need to memorize anything, right? Like we don't have our students memorize anything. We actually, if you try to memorize questions, I'll just say this: there's an infinite number of questions that you actually have to memorize, right? Because there's always more questions that the banker could ask you when it comes to technicals, or they can change things up. They can change up the number. They can change up the assumption. They can change up the way that they phrase the question, the wording. They can dress it up or disguise it as a different question when it's actually just a variation of the same question, but you just don't realize that, right? And so even though the interview guide has 400 questions in it, in reality, there are thousands of different questions that have been asked, right, in the past, right? And so you're never going to be able to memorize every single question. But if you flip that upside down and you say, hey, instead of memorizing the questions, I'm actually just going to learn the concepts underlying the questions, then there are actually only less than a handful of concepts that you need to know, right? You need to master accounting, which is the 3 financial statements: income statement, cash flow statement, balance sheet. How do they all link together? What are all the line items on each statement, right? What happens in a certain business transaction and how does that flow through everything? And then the second thing is valuation methodologies, right? Trading comps, transaction comps, trading comps, transaction comps, discounted cash flow, right? And there are other less popular valuation methodologies, or some more industry specific ones like, DDM or some of the parts. You can consider LBOs a valuation methodology if you really want to, right? So there's valuation methodology, right? Related to that, there's also equity value and enterprise value, and understanding the difference between those two things and how they work, right? There's also mergers and acquisitions. There's accretion dilution, which is just doing merger math to figure out if an M&A transaction is actually a good transaction or not, right? Or if it's a transaction that your shareholders will like or not. And then there's leverage buyouts, right? Which is just another more complex, more advanced form of M&A, right? Where the buyer is a private equity firm, as opposed to just a strategic buyer, which is just when a company is buying another company, right? Like I said, Microsoft acquired GitHub. That's a strategic transaction, right? Versus a private equity firm buying a target company, and that's a financial sponsor. That's a financial buyer, right? Financial buyer versus strategic buyer, right? So anyway, those are like, I just rattled off like probably 5 major categories of things that you need to know, and those are the only concepts that you need to understand, right? In fact, it's finite in the sense that like we're actually, and some of you guys have probably gotten your hands on this before, but we've actually taken all the concepts and all the formulas that you need to know, and we were able to fit it onto just 2 pages, a 2-page Word document, which is, we call it the technical cheat sheet, right? All of our clients use it, but we also offer it as a free resource for people that are not working with us yet. But like, it just goes to show there's only so much that you need to know from a concept standpoint. So it's just a lot more efficient if you actually learn to understand those concepts, right? But it's hard to understand the concepts, and it's easier to just memorize stuff if you're doing it on your own, because you don't understand these concepts, right? But if you have an investment banker who's well-versed in these concepts, can actually teach it to you in a classroom setting, it's not rocket science, right? So that's the first difference, right? The second difference is you need to have repetition, right? And so by repetition, it's like, yes, okay, now you understand these concepts, right? But you need to practice with different questions, right? That's actually where these guys can be useful, is like just as a question bank, right? They're just not great as like the first step in the learning process, but you can use them to like kind of quiz yourself on things, right? But the other thing is like, when you're just quizzing yourself, it's not really the same thing, because you're going to have blind spots, right? And then so the way that our students are kind of getting this repetition too is we actually have this huge group chat that we're all part of, or we use Slack channels, right? So we have a technical questions channel where everyone is in the channel. So it's almost like you're a part of this gigantic study group, right? And at any time as people are learning these technical concepts, if they have questions about anything, they'll go into the technical questions channel and they'll just drop their question in the channel, right? And then once you drop their question in the channel, one of us, like me or one of our other coaches, who are all, again, investment bankers or former investment bankers who have worked at the top banks and have served as interviewers, we will go in and actually answer their questions and explain to them, you know, what the concept is behind that question, right? But also a lot of the times, other students of ours who are maybe ahead of the person who asked the question, they'll chime in and answer the question before we can even answer the question, right? And what they're doing when they do that is they're putting in reps. They're trying to answer the questions that other people are asking. It's almost like this constant stream of pop quiz, so to speak, that you're just getting, right? And the beauty of that is like, well, why can't I just do that on my own? Well, the beauty of that is because now you're crowdsourcing the list of questions, because a lot of the times when other people ask questions, they're not asking the exact same questions that you would have asked, right? A lot of times our students, they look at the list of questions in that channel and they're like, oh, wow, never thought of that question. I didn't even know that was a thing, or I didn't even know that was a concept. But now that I've seen the question, I'm curious because I don't know the answer. That's definitely something that I think I would need to know too. So now you can follow along and see if you can answer the question, great. If you can't answer the question, then you can follow along and see what the coaches say when they come in and answer the question, right? So now you're basically filling in the gaps on a lot of these blind spots that you would have had otherwise, right? Which is going to only accelerate your learning even more, right? And you have this constant stream of questions that are coming in that you're constantly testing yourself and you're gauging yourself and you're seeing like, hey, am I making progress? Because realistically, if you're doing it correctly, what should be happening is you should be able to answer more and more of these questions with like the frequency with which you can answer these questions correctly should be increasing over time, to the point where eventually, you know, you're able to answer, you know, between 95 to 100% of all the questions that other people are asking, right? So being a part of the right community, or being in the right environment where you're surrounded by a lot of other like-minded individuals who are also trying to work towards the same goal as you and who are super collaborative, and everybody works together and helps each other out and answers each other's questions, that's really, really helpful, right? You guys probably heard the saying, like, you're the average of 5 people that you spend the most time with, right? So if you surround yourself with a lot of other people who are in the know, who are working hard, who are working towards this goal, and they're knowledgeable, like, that's going to rub off on you. Like, just through simple exposure through osmosis almost, right? And especially for those of you, like not all of you, but some of you, you probably go to like non-target schools. There's probably not a lot of students at your school who are actually even trying to break into investment banking, or who even know what investment banking is in the first place. So you don't have people like that to go to. You don't have people you can study with. And if that's the case, like, you're at a huge disadvantage to the students who do have that, right? And so that's the second thing, right? And then the last thing is, look, as you're learning this stuff and as you're answering these questions on your own, as you're practicing, you're going to get better and better at it. But then once you get to a point where you feel like, okay, I'm pretty good, or I feel like I'm in a pretty good place, I feel like I'm ready for the interview, or maybe you're not sure if you're ready, but you have an actual interview coming up. You know, like my client who has an interview coming up this Friday with Houlihan Lokey, like I said, that's a final round interview, right? And so at that point, like, what you need to do, like the last step, which is really, really important, you can't skip this, is you got to do some mock interviews, right? Like, just studying and reading stuff on a page, it's not the same as if you were to go through the actual interview, go through the real thing and simulate the real interview environment, interview setting, where you're being grilled on these questions in more of a high pressure environment, right? Because sometimes, like, people can perform when there's no pressure whatsoever, but when it's a high pressure environment, then they choke up, right? So you want to see how you perform in as close of a realistic setting as possible to the actual thing, right? And by that, I mean, like, when we say as close to the real thing as possible, doesn't mean like, hey, just sitting down with your buddy who you're not intimidated by at all, and having them ask you questions, and then, like, if there are no questions, or if you don't get the right answer, there's no consequences, right? What we're actually talking about is, like, our students will then do mock interviews with their coaches, like with the actual investment bankers, right? And so the way we do these mock interviews, though, is we will actually grill them as hard as we can, try to make them mess up as much as we can, right? Depending on how they do, like, basically what will happen is, the way a mock interview should happen, and the way a lot of real interviews actually happen at these banks, you guys may not know this, is that they're not asking you a predetermined list of questions. It's not like, oh, we have this list of technical questions, or we're just going to ask everyone all the same questions, right? It might be more standardized on the behavioral side, but on the technical side, a lot of times what the bankers are doing is they'll test you, right? They'll ask you a technical question, and then if you get the question right, they're like, okay, this is too easy, let's go a little bit harder, right? And if you get that right, okay, this one's too easy, let's go a little bit harder. And then so they're ratcheting up the degree of difficulty on the questions that they ask you, to see how far they can push you before you actually mess up, right? And the reason why they're doing that is not because, so a lot of times people say, well, man, I messed up on one of the technical questions, does that mean that I'm not going to be able to get a job? And the answer is no, right? Because the point is not to get 100% of the questions right. The point, though, is to outlast your competition, right? Like, if your competition can only get 5 questions in before he messes up, but you got 8 questions deep, or 10 questions deep, or 12 questions deep, then you're obviously ahead of the other people, right? At the end of the day, what you have to understand is, if the banker wants you to mess up, they're going to get you to mess up, because they're always going to know more than you will, right? They're always going to be more knowledgeable. They're always going to be able to ask you something that you just, don't know yet. And that's fine, right? But the way we do our mock interviews is the same thing, right? Like, to be able to do the mock interview that way, where you're increasing the degree of difficulty, you're ratcheting that up, requires you to have the skill level and the technical knowledge to do that, right? Like, if your technical knowledge, if your interviewer, the person that's doing the mock for you, if their technical knowledge is not that much better than yours, then there's a ceiling on how advanced they can get, right? Or worse, like, if you're so well prepped that they're actually worse off than you, then they're actually probably not going to help you at all. They're actually going to even bring you down, right? And so what you want to do is, like, the way we do our mock interviews is, we'll ask increasingly more difficult questions throughout the mock, And we're just trying to see how far we can push our clients. And then at the end of the mock, also giving very, very detailed feedback on every single question. So as the student is answering these questions, we're taking detailed notes on every single question. And then we actually tick through every single answer one by one. Sometimes the answer is really, really good, in which case there's not a whole lot to give feedback on. But most of the time, even if the answer is correct, there is such a thing as being correct, but still not being the best answer. Okay, meaning your delivery could have been better. You could have been more crisp with it. You could have explained it in a more concise manner, or you could have made it easier to understand. Like the more concise and crisp you can be with your answer, and the fewer words you can explain a certain concept in, it typically comes across as you being more confident, more knowledgeable, and your skill set being more advanced, right? So we're at that point when we get to the mock interview. Usually, our students aren't really there to test whether they know the concept already, right? They already know the concept. They feel pretty good about the concepts. We're there to test their delivery, their body language, right? How they say, not just what they say, but how they're saying certain things. This is like the more advanced level stuff. It's more nuanced. It's the stuff that not everyone's going to be able to give you a whole lot of feedback on, right? And so that's really like at the end of the day, like when you get to, if you're qualified enough to get to the final round interview, most of the students there who make it to the super day are going to be pretty qualified, right? They're not going to be, they're going to know, like, they're going to know their stuff, at least like the basics, right? So at that point, the difference between the person who's getting the offer and the person who didn't get the offer, or the person who just missed the cut, it's usually not like a huge difference. It's actually around the margins, right? That's what you have to understand, is like, it's those small nuanced refinements that actually end up making the difference a lot of the times. So you might think like, hey, I'm already pretty good, but sometimes you're pretty good is like almost good enough, but not quite. And that's like the worst feeling in the world, right? It's like, if you guys watch football, it's like driving the ball all the way down to the 1 yard line and then stalling out and not being able to punch it in for a touchdown, right? So the last thing about the mock interview that I will say too is you have to, in terms of the quality of the feedback that you get from your interviewer, a lot of that is going to be dependent on their experience level, right? So what the experience level is like, how many people have they interviewed before, right? If they've only interviewed one or two people, or maybe they haven't interviewed that many people, or they themselves have gone through the interview process one time, they're not gonna have a huge sample size of data to work off of when it comes to their feedback for you, right? Because think about it, like the analogy that I use is, let's say you're not trying to become an investment banker, you're actually trying to become a doctor. So then you got to go to med school, right? And now you're in med school, and maybe you want to become a heart surgeon, right? And to learn how to operate on someone's heart, would you rather, model yourself after maybe someone who's in residency, who's a year or two above you, and is doing their first operation ever? Like, do you want them to be teaching you how to operate on someone, or do you want to learn from, the heart surgeon that's been operating for the last 10 years, the last 15 years, and has done hundreds of operations and has seen all sorts of different scenarios and knows what to do, right? It's the same thing with interviewing. If your interviewer has actually been an interviewer before at one of these top banks, they've actually interviewed actual candidates who are applying to these banks, and they've actually sat in the room deliberating with the other bankers on who was a good candidate, who was not, why they thought they were good or not, what is it that these bankers care about, what are they looking for? That's knowledge that most people just don't have, right? And not to mention, like, on top of that, if that banker has then gone on to also work with hundreds of other students on coaching them on how to get into investment banking, and have very successfully gotten those people into the top banks. Like in the last 3 years, I think we've gotten our clients into 21 out of the 25 top banks. Okay. And we're working on the last 4, and we'll get there eventually, hopefully this year, if not next year. But pretty much all the who's all the banks out there, we pretty much have clients that have gone through their interviews, and we know what the interview's like, and we know what it takes to ace those interviews, right? So that's kind of like the difference. Okay, like again, if you do it the old way, most people, they'll spend upwards of hundreds of hours, and even at the end of that, they're still not getting to the level that they could have gotten to, right? And they're still not, they're no longer ahead of the curve. They're no longer more competitive than everyone else just based on what they're doing. Right now, if you want to be ahead of the curve, you want to be better than everyone else, you want to do something that no one else is doing, then you got to consider learning directly from these bankers and getting the type of feedback that's based on actual data, actual, like a sample size of hundreds of students that have gone to these interviews, what works in these interviews and what doesn't work. And if you do it that way, you can learn all this stuff again in just 20 to 30 hours. So even if it is March 9th right now, right, as of the date of this live training, a lot of the interviews are probably going to open up. I mean, applications are already open, but they're going through the applications now. The interviews will probably start to, I think, happen like quite frequently in probably the next month. If it's not, then definitely the next 2 months. Okay, basically, before we roll into the summer, you should expect a bulk of the interviews, especially at some of these bulge bracket elite boutique banks, to kick off, right? So you still have a little bit of time left. You just don't have a lot of time, right? And so if you're feeling like, hey, I don't have a lot of time, and you have that sense of urgency, and you know that, you want to accelerate your learning process, not only accelerate it and do it in less time, but you want to do it in a way that's going to be more effective, where even just in 20 to 30 hours, you're going to become much more advanced, much more technical than you would have been in, 100 plus hours of studying, which God knows you guys don't have that much time, right? Because you're currently a student, you're trying to maintain your grades in school, and that's already a lot of work. You're also having to learn the technicals, but on top of that, you're also trying to network with these bankers. You're trying to submit your applications. You're involved in, clubs on campus. You're doing internships to beef up your resume. You're also having to work on your behavioral answers. Like, there's so many things you have to do. Efficiency is the name of the game, right? At the end of the day, those of you who are more efficient than other people, those of you who can get more done in the amount of time that we have left, you're going to be the ones who end up with that offer, right? So time is your most valuable resource right now. You should always be thinking about, how can I get more time? Or rather, how can I be more efficient in the amount of time that I have? Because we can't get more time. We all have 24 hours in a day. It's fixed. But the way to get more time is to be more efficient, right? So anyway, that's kind of like the gist of it. I want to open things up. I do want to leave some time. I want to open things up for Q&A, especially since I'm on like multiple different, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube right now. So I think there are different comments that have come in on a different platform. So I'm going to check to see what questions you guys have. If you guys have questions, now will be the time to drop it down in the comment section. Okay. So I'll let you guys do that for a minute or two here, and then I'll hit refresh, because most of these websites, there's a lag between when you submit the questions and when they actually come in. But while I'm waiting for the questions to come in, I'll just do a quick little commercial break for those of you that join in the middle. Maybe you missed it in the beginning. If you're new to Wall Street Mastermind, or if you're following me for the first time, not really sure what it is that we do, essentially, we help students like you break into investment banking, and we'll help you with everything you need from A to Z, whether it's beefing up your resume, helping you find more relevant experience so that you can look like a more qualified candidate on paper, to teaching you how to network effectively, to get referrals from every single bank that you're applying to. Because really, let's be honest, the referral is the key to getting selected for the interview, right? If you don't have that, it's very, very hard. So then once you have the interview, also making sure that you're really, really sound on the technical side, which is what I've been talking about today on this live training, to the behavioral side, which is making sure that you have very unique stories crafted about yourself that's going to make you stand out, right? And I say unique stories as in, do not, for the love of God, do not just go take the exact answer that's provided in these interview guides that's being read by tens of thousands of students, and then use that exact answer or a very similar answer to that. Because if you do that, what's going to happen is you're going to go into these interviews and you're going to sound exactly the same like everybody else, right? And that's the fastest way for you to get disqualified and not stand out, right? So anyway, we help you with all of those things, or maybe just some of those things if you only need help with some of those things. And basically, you get to work with very experienced investment bankers who will help you one-on-one, pretty much 24/7 on demand from now until you get the job. Okay. So if that sounds interesting to you guys, again, we have an over 90% success rate. It's pretty much the best in the industry. No one else out there has that type of success rate because they just don't put in the amount of work that we put in with every single individual. Like this one-on-one customized approach, it's very high touch. It's why we get such phenomenal results, right? So if you're looking for that type of help, then feel free to message me. You can message me on, LinkedIn or Facebook, or you can email me. It's sam@wallstreetmastermind.com. The street's abbreviated to ST. And we'll be happy to, have someone on our team talk to you, figure out what your goals are, see if your goals make sense in the amount of time that you have left, even with the acceleration that we're going to be able to provide you, and also see what it is that you need us to help you with. And then, if we think we're highly confident that we can help you accomplish those goals, we will let you know, and we will show you how we think we can do that. If we're not confident, we will let you know as well. And we'll tell you that something else will give you advice or whatever we think it is that you should do instead, right, to get you the best outcome possible. So at a minimum, we'll give you some recruiting advice. And if all goes well and we feel like you're a good fit, I'm happy to take you on as one of the very small group of students that we're able to help one-on-one. Okay, so let me check out the questions that have come in. So I'm going to go through Facebook first, and I'll hit LinkedIn and YouTube, okay, one at a time, because, again, I'm on multiple platforms here. But on Facebook, Daniel says, how do you sign up for coaching? Yeah, Daniel, so if you want to sign up for coaching here, I'm going to drop a link down below. So there's a www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. So you can go to wallstreetmastermind.com. Again, the street's abbreviated to ST. So the wallstmastermind.com/apply. And then what will happen is you'll be able to pick a time that works for your calendar. I don't know what your availabilities are, but you'll see our team's calendar. You'll be able to pick a time to speak to someone on our team. And like I said, we'll go through the process with you where we learn more about your situation and what it is that you need help with to see if we can customize something that works for you. Okay. Because the way we work with everybody is different. You're a unique candidate to yourself, right? So I would do that. Go ahead and book that call if you want. And we look forward to talking to you. Okay. Zion asks, how often will they ask you to build a model on the spot? Yeah, it's a great question, Zion. So we talk about this all the time, right? This is why we're not a fan of financial modeling courses for the purpose of interviewing. Okay, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there's no place for financial modeling courses. What I am saying is the time to do a financial modeling course is after you've gotten the offer and before you've actually started the job, right? So if you get the offer and you're trying to prepare for the actual internship yourself, then I think taking a financial modeling course makes sense. But if you're just trying to pass the interview, then it actually doesn't make sense, because the top banks, at least, okay, like who knows what like the small tiny banks do, but if you're talking about like the top banks, the bulge bracket banks, the elite boutique banks, and even the middle market banks, let's say like the top 50 banks out there, okay, which are typically the ones that most people want to work for, they don't ask you to build financial models during the actual interview process. They will not like take out a laptop, put it in front of you, and open up an empty spreadsheet and say, hey, build us an M&A model, or build us an LBO model, or build us a DCF. Like they just don't do that, right? You got to trust me on this, because we've had, again, hundreds of students collectively probably go through thousands of interviews at these firms. So we have a very large sample size of data in terms of what they ask in these interviews and what they don't. And so they're not going to ask you to build these models on the spot. At least as of today, they don't, right? Going back to my point earlier about how things continue to get more and more competitive over time, who knows? In a couple of years, they might do that, right? If someday, I highly doubt this will happen, but if someday just verbally testing people on these technical concepts is no longer enough to distinguish the good candidates from the bad candidates, because if we get to the point where everyone can do that fluently, then yeah, they might take it up a notch and ask you guys to build a model on the spot. But right now, they don't really do that. That only happens probably when you start to recruit for private equity, okay? Or maybe like after when you start to recruit for buy-side jobs. after banking, if you want to go to the buy side, those interviews will get very technical, and those interviews will ask you to build models on the spot. Okay. So like we have a new private equity program, for example, where when we train our private equity clients on a technical interview, we focus a lot on financial modeling. Okay. So that's a great question. Let me see if there are other questions. So Steven asks, are there any major differences you have noticed in the Super Day interviews in the online format as compared to in person? Yeah, Steven, no, not really. There's not a huge difference, except for the fact that you're doing it on Zoom, or Zoom, or whatever other web conferencing software that they're using, as opposed to in person. It's still the same format. It's still multiple 30-minute interviews back to back to back to back. You usually, every interview will have between 1 to 2 interviewers, right? And then you're still going to meet a variety of investment bankers across all seniority levels, right? So from managing director to VP to associates. Sometimes you might even meet analysts, right? And it just depends on the firm and the scheduling and who's available on the team. But in terms of like the actual questions that are being asked, there's not a huge difference, right? So, as long as you can see the other person, you can read their body language, you can read the room, you can hear their tonality. I don't really think that anything, I don't really think you need to change anything in terms of your approach, if that makes sense. Okay. Zion says, thank you for the answer. No problem. Okay. Let me switch over here to LinkedIn and YouTube. If you guys have more questions on Facebook, feel free to continue to comment. I'll come back around. On LinkedIn, Rohit asks, where is the 2-page document? Okay. So the 2-page document, it's a technical cheat sheet. I'll have to find the URL for where you can sign up for that, and I can reply to your comment later on. I don't have it off the top of my head. I just need to find out what it is. Okay. Where do I start? He asks on LinkedIn, where do I start if not the popular guides? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what I talked about, right? Like, I think you can start with the popular guides. I'm not saying you can't. A lot of people just use the popular guides. I'm just saying nowadays, if you're just using the popular guides, you're not going to be competitive, right? Like, I'm not saying you can't get a job if you do that. Okay. I would never say that. A lot of people do get jobs, not a lot. A small minority of the people do get jobs if they just only use the guides. But it's a matter of probability, right? Like, statistically speaking, if you think about it, these guys, like I said, now are kind of like the industry-wide standard. Like, everybody that's applying, they have access to these guides, right? So you got to ask yourself, like, statistically speaking, what percentage of people are actually getting into banking? Well, the top banks, again, bulge bracket, elite, boutique type banks, they accept between 1% to 3% of their applicant pool every single year, right? So that means that the vast majority of the people that are doing that, over 90% of the people that are doing that, probably aren't actually getting offers, right? So can it be done? Yes. Is it the best way? No, right? It just comes down to, like, what kind of odds do you want, right? Do you like those odds? What's the probability that you want for you to get into banking? If you want 90+% likelihood of getting into banking, then you got to find a better way, right? To get a leg up. You got to stay ahead of the curve. You got to do something that your competition is not doing. And like I said, I pretty much already covered what that is around this training, which is work with someone like us who's an actual investment banker, not just myself, but the rest of my team as well, who have actually worked as investment bankers for many years at these top banks, who are very, very experienced and very knowledgeable, and have a very large sample size of data in terms of what type of answers work, what doesn't, what questions get asked, so on and so forth, and can give you the level of quality feedback that you deserve, right? So hopefully that makes sense. And then let me come over to YouTube real quick. Ryan says, Sam, what's up? What's up, Ryan? Good to see you. Kevin asks, I graduated and no work experience, organization. Do I have a chance? Kevin, it's hard to say if you have a chance now without looking at your exact resume, but because there's so many factors that go into that, right? What school did you go to? What's your GPA? And you said, but if you say you have no work experience, no extracurricular activities, like your resume is literally empty, then I would say your chances aren't very good, to be completely honest, right? Especially since you already graduated, okay? The way that these banks recruit is a lot of them will only hire either out of undergrad or out of business school, like out of an MBA program, like a top MBA program. They will hire graduates, kind of like in between undergrad and MBA, like people who have maybe graduated and have been working for a year or 2 years. But typically, if they do that, um, depending on the bank, but the top banks, they'll usually say, if you look at the job description, they'll say, we want people who have at least 1 year of investment banking experience already, right? But we also have clients, like we've had a handful of clients who came to us after they graduated and they weren't working in banking yet. They had like two of them were working in audit at KPMG. One of them was working in corp dev. One of them was working in valuation. Those are the four off the top of my head. Obviously, these aren't the majority of the people that we work with, but a small group. But all four of them ended up getting offers into banking. But the commonality that they had is, even though they weren't already in banking, they were in jobs that were somewhat tangential to banking. Like they were at least in some sort of finance job, right? I mean, audit, I guess that's more accounting than finance, but still, it's related, right? Valuation is related. Corporate development means you're doing, M&A in-house, so that's related, right? So usually you need at least some sort of relevant experience. Point being, you need at least some sort of relevant experience if you're already graduated. In which case, if you have that, then yeah, it's absolutely possible to still break into banking. But it's gonna be tough. You're gonna have to know what you're doing. You're gonna have to play your cards right. You're gonna have to know how to network your way in, which is a big part of what we help those clients with, right? And obviously, you're gonna have to nail the interviews and really address the elephant in the room, which is like, can this guy actually do the job if he has no banking experience, right? So hopefully that helps you. DW asks, will there be opportunities to gain referral contacts through your program? Yeah, I mean, look, our program inherently is a network, right? It's a network of past and current clients, right? And we have past clients that are now currently working at some of these top banks, right? And then that network is only going to grow over time, right? I don't know what year you are in school right now, DW, but the more time that passes and the longer we've been around, the more people we have in these banks, right? But also at the same time, like, I just want to be very, very clear. What we're doing in this program is, we're not saying, on the networking side, we're not just saying, hey, come into this program and then we'll introduce you to all the people that we already know. If that's all this was, then quite frankly, I mean, it's useful, but it's not the most useful thing, right? What would really be useful is, like, instead of just giving you the fish, we're teaching you how to fish, right? So we're going to teach you on the networking side specifically, we're going to teach you how to go out and actually build your own network and establish your own contacts with these bankers who are actually total strangers, who, you might think have no reason to help you, but because you network with them the right way, because you know where to find them, because you knew what to talk to them about, or you knew what to say when you first reached out to get them to respond in the first place. And then when they actually agree to talk to you, you knew what to talk to them about. How can you get them to actually proactively give you the referral without you having to explicitly ask for it? Okay, because on the networking side, the biggest misconception out there is like, oh, well, how do I ask for the referral? The answer is you don't, right? You can't ask for the referral. That's just like bad etiquette. And if you ask for the referral, you're not going to be very successful with it. So then it becomes a bit trickier and a bit harder. Is like, well, if I can't ask for it, then how do I get them to do what I want them to do? Well, the answer to that is like, you have to accomplish two things. You have to, one, impress them, and two, you have to make them like you, right? So a big part of what we're teaching on the networking side is how to accomplish those two things, to the point where by the end of your conversation with them, they'll actually proactively offer to refer you without you even have to ask for it. Okay, because if you have to ask for it, sometimes they'll lie to you and they'll say, oh, yeah, sure, yeah, I'm happy to refer you. And you think you have the referral when you actually don't, right? If you don't have to ask for it and they proactively offer it to you, then you know that they actually meant it, right? Because they don't have to proactively offer anything. If they don't actually want to refer you, there's no reason for them to go out of their way and say, oh, yeah, sure, happy to refer you. They're just not going to do that, right? So hopefully that answers your question, DW. That's all I see on YouTube. Let me come back to Facebook. I'm just cycling through all the different websites right now. Steven asks, Also, do you see any banks hiring full-time analysts that are currently seniors? Yeah, I mean, Steven, so it's funny you say that. We actually have two seniors who just recently, like as in this past week, just recently got full-time offers from Jeffries. Okay. And then they were like really late because what I would say is this: as a senior, if you're still recruiting for investment banking, um, most of these banks at this point of senior year, like March, which is like 2 months before you're about to graduate, usually this late in the process, the top banks, like the bulge bracket, the elite boutique, the middle market banks, they're not recruiting for full times anymore because usually when they recruit for full time is at the end of summer, at the end of your junior summer internship, right? So if you're a senior right now, that means that you're graduating in 2021. So your summer internship, your junior summer internship would have taken place in summer 2020, right? This past summer that already happened, right? And what will happen is they do an 8 to 10 week internship, and at the end of that internship, they will give the vast majority of the full time offers to their summer intern class, the people that actually end up performing well, right? Ideally, they will want to hire their entire class if they can, but usually it doesn't end up being the case. Well, it depends on the bank and the group, right? But in most cases, bottom line is they'll give 80 to 90%, sometimes more, maybe 100% of the offers, the full time offers, to the summer interns because they would rather give the offers to someone that they've been able to see for 8 to 10 weeks and they've been able to try them out, so to speak, before bringing them onto the team, as opposed to maybe just someone that they interviewed a couple times, maybe had several 30-minute interviews. Like there's only so much that they can tell from a few 30-minute conversations, right? Like compared to an 8 to 10 week internship where they actually got to see how you work, it's just not the same thing, right? Now, the last 10 to 20% of the offers that don't get taken, or maybe they give out the offers and then their interns don't accept it because maybe their interns decided they want to go somewhere else, they want to go to a better bank, or maybe they don't want to do banking at all, they switch industries. Then the leftovers, like the remaining spots, will be filled by seniors who are still looking, right? But even then, they usually will know if the interns are coming back around August. I would say like early to mid August. That's when they give out these offers, right? And so as soon as they know how many spots they have left, they will go out and try to fill those spots ASAP because these banks are very competitive. They all want to get first dibs on whatever candidates are still left before their competitors take them, right? And so by the time it's March, most of the banks aren't really they filled their class already, like pretty much like 6 7 months ago, right? This year was a bit of an anomaly. Like there's an exception because some of these banks, because of COVID, at the end of summer 2020, they didn't give out very many offers, or they cut back on the number of offers they gave because they were pessimistic about where the economy was going and how much deal flow there was going to be and stuff like that. And so the offer rate this past summer was a lot lower, and then the market actually recovered much more quickly than what some of these banks were expecting. And so some of these banks realized that they underhired, right? And which is why like banks like Jeffries were still recruiting all the way through even March, through recently, right? At this point, going forward between now and the next 2 or 3 months or whatever, um, you know, I think that most likely, if you're recruiting for a bank, you can still get into banking. Again, there's a lot of other factors, right? It depends on what's on your resume and how good you are technically, behaviorally, how much networking have you done, do you have people that are willing to refer you? So all the things that I already talked about earlier, the 4 different pieces of the puzzle. But I think at this point, if you're still recruiting, chances are that you're going to have to start out at probably more of a regional boutique bank if you're a senior. Okay. If you're like 2 months out from graduating, you're probably going to have to start at a regional boutique. And then what you can do is go work at a regional boutique for, let's say, 6 to 9 to 12 months, right? Do your first year there, get some experience under your belt, highly relevant experience. And then from there, you can try to lateral into one of these bigger banks. So almost every big bank always hires lateral analysts every single year, right? Because what happens is people either quit early, like they thought they wanted to do banking and they actually don't, or they realize they don't. Once they get there, they're like, oh, I'm miserable, work-life balance sucks, whatever. Like they're not cut out for banking, right? And so they'll quit early, or they'll quit after their first year when they get their bonuses. In which case, the bank still has a lot of work to do, so they'll backfill those people, right? And the first place they'll look downstream at some of the other banks that are either similar to them or maybe slightly smaller than them, because they're not going to be able to hire probably from banks that are better than them, because people just don't move from bigger banks to smaller banks for no reason, right? But they will look at other people that are already in banking, in which case at that point, you can apply for those jobs. And if you nail those interviews, you can absolutely break in, right? Like I myself did my first year at Deutsche Bank, and then I lateral to Morgan Stanley, to their technology group, which is one of the best on the street, for my second and third year, right? So you can do something like that if you want to. There are also people that just start out at a smaller bank, at a regional boutique bank, and they really like it there. They like their firm. They're doing well. They're getting promoted. They're making, enough money for them, still well into the six figures. And they're like, hey, I'm just going to stay here. That could happen as well, right? So hopefully that answers your question. Let me come back to this other side. On the YouTube channel here, DW asks, how do banks view applicants that are coming from an entrepreneurial background? I graduated from Johns Hopkins in 2019 and started a life sciences company. Would it be better to get an MBA first and then go for IB? Yeah, DW, it's a great question. I think that, entrepreneurial background, it depends on how you spin it, right? I'm sure there's a way to spin it. If you start a life sciences company, for example, personally, if I were you, I would be targeting some of the more healthcare focused banks, right? There are a lot of banks out there that only do healthcare or only do life sciences, but they're very, very good in that niche, right? So like Leerink, for example, is one such bank. There are other healthcare banks like MTS Health and probably a bunch that I'm missing, right? And so that's part of it, right? If you want to go that route. I would say though, like if you want the most straightforward path into banking at this point, it would probably be to get an MBA from a top business school. Okay. If you want to get into top bank though, just keep in mind that at the MBA level, these banks are even more strict about only hiring from target schools, right? There's this concept in banking of target schools versus non-target schools. So at the undergrad level, banks will hire primarily from target schools, but they still hire from non-target schools. It's just that they have a limited amount of time. So historically, they would go to target schools like the Ivy League schools and the top public schools, and they'll do like on-campus events, and they'll actually meet the students, which is it's a huge advantage to those students, right? Because the banks are coming to you and actually seeking you out, right? If you're from a non-target school, they don't have time to come talk to you, and so you have to be a lot more proactive in putting yourself out there and getting in front of them, right? And so it's just harder. There's fewer alumni who can help you, but at the MBA level, the top banks almost hire exclusively only from the top MBA programs. So and to define top MBA program, I would say at a minimum, you have to be in a top 20 program. Okay. Ideally, obviously the higher the better, like ideally probably top 10 or, even like top 5, like just the higher up you can go, the better. And I mean, it's not that straightforward. Also, obviously some MBA programs have better finance programs than others, right? And some MBA programs place a bigger percentage of the class into finance than others or into banking than others because, like, for example, maybe Columbia or NYU because they're in New York and they're right there. So you can actually go pull what's called an employment report for all these MBA programs. Most of the top programs, they'll actually release statistics every single year on what percentage of their graduating class went into investment banking versus, all the other industries. They'll break it down, right? And also like which employers have actually hired from our school this past year, right? And so you should do your research on that. Most MBA programs, so I've actually looked at this, the top 20 MBA programs, on average, right? So some higher, some lower. On average, they'll only they'll place about 10% of their graduating class into investment banking. Okay, I've seen as high as 20+%, and I've seen as low as like 5%. But on average, it's about 10% of the graduating class. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that it's a 10% acceptance rate because it's not like 100% of your MBA class is going to be applying, right? But I will say investment banking typically is one of the most popular career options for MBA students, right? So I think it's safe to assume that depending on the school you go to, probably anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of your class will at least be interested in banking. Okay, so what that means is a lot of people who go get an MBA, this is a really important point that I want to make. A lot of people, they go get an MBA. I've seen this many, many times where they say, okay, I'm going to go get an MBA so I can get into banking. And then they spend, $200,000+ on their MBA tuition. And then 2 years of their life, 2 years of not working. So there's those opportunity costs from a professional standpoint, right? And from an earning standpoint. And then they go through the MBA process and they recruit and then they don't get the job, right? I would say probably still less than half of the applicants in the top MBA programs don't end up getting to banking, right? If you just do the math that I just talked about, right? And so you have to be really careful if you go the MBA route. It's just like, it's a big investment in terms of time and money. You want to make sure that it really is the right thing for you. If you have conviction that that's what you want to do, then yeah, you should absolutely do it. But if you don't have conviction, then the other way to do it is, like I said, probably targeting life sciences companies. But then it's going to be harder in the sense that you're not going to go through like the traditional path. You're going to have to like network with a lot of these firms, try to network your way in, put yourself in front of them. You're going to have to also demonstrate that you can actually do the job, right? You're going to have to demonstrate that. You're going to have to address the elephant in the room, which is, okay, you're an entrepreneur. That's great, but you don't have any finance experience. How do I know you're going to be able to come in and be able to actually hit the ground running, right? But you have other advantages that most candidates probably don't have, which is you've actually run a company before, right? And so you have the perspective of like what the management team of a company would think, right? Or how they would think about their business, right? And those are the people who are going to be your clients, right? Those are the people that you're going to be advising. Maybe you can speak their language, so on and so forth, right? And so, that's a big part of like how you position yourself as a candidate, right? That's a lot of what we work with our clients on, is like, hey, that's why we say every single client is different. You have your own unique situation. It can't be a one size fits all thing. Like the way you would approach recruiting has to be totally different from most of these other students that are trying to get in banking from undergrad, right? And so that's why we have to customize something for every single individual to make sure that it actually makes sense for them. The strategy makes sense for them. And the stories and the answers that they're using in these interviews to talk about themselves has to make sense, right? And the preparation process and the networking process, that all has to make sense, right? Based on your situation. So I know that was a long answer. Hopefully that answers your question, though. I try to go pretty detailed and be pretty thorough. So let me see if there are any other questions here. Let me circle back around. Check the Facebook real quick. By the way, and so for those of you who maybe are new, like especially if you're on LinkedIn or on Facebook or on YouTube, if you want to join our free Facebook group, we have a free Facebook group where we post all sorts of useful stuff multiple times a week, right? So I'll drop the Facebook group link down below in the comments so that you guys can actually access it. Okay. Yeah, DW says thank you. Yeah, no problem, DW. So we can come back to Facebook. Okay, I don't see any new comments on Facebook. So guys, if you have other questions, I'm doing a last call right now. We're over a little bit on time, but that's fine. If you have last minute questions, drop them in right now and I'll try to answer them. But if you guys don't have any more questions, then like I said, feel free to reach out to me, whether it's on Facebook or on LinkedIn or just by emailing me. If you guys are interested in getting our help with your investment banking recruiting process, again, we have an over 90% success rate. So when it comes to something as important as your career, you just want to maximize the probability of success. You want to maximize your outcome, right? Whether it's the difference between you not being able to get in on your own to you now being able to get into banking, or you could have gotten in on your own, but now you're getting into an even better bank. Both of those things will improve the trajectory of your career. It'll improve your exit opportunities, right? It'll improve the halo effect on your resume, and it'll improve, quite frankly, your compensation, right? So those are all really, really important things. So I don't see any other questions. So I think we'll wrap it up here, guys. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Jason says, Sam, hey, what's up, Jason? Good to see you, man. We got to catch up sometimes. But that'll be it for today, guys. So we'll be back again next week, same time, with another training for you guys. So stay tuned for that, and we'll talk soon. All right. Bye.